This is the National Desk, America's News Now.
It's election interference. This whole thing is election interference.
From the Supreme Court to New York, Trump now the center of two historic cases. His presidential immunity in question. At the same time, key witnesses are cross-examined in the hush money case. Plus,
this is a way for younger people to get into the market soon.
Houses before spouses. The growing number of young people teaming up with their friends to buy a home. And later, millions more Americans are now eligible for Wegovy. How increased access to the weight loss drug could spike Medicare costs. From the nation's capital, this is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm TD Gatton, and on this weekend edition, we take a look at the big headlines of the week and we look ahead at what to expect, starting with the four big stories we've been following this week. Disgraced movie mogul Harvey Weinstein's rape conviction overturned. The three main reasons for the shocking verdict. The Supreme Court sharply divided what was said in the High Court, signaling the future of emergency abortion access and taking the pulse of young American voters, the key issues Gen Z is taking up ahead of this year's elections. But first, spreading like wildfire, some lawmakers' efforts to end the unrest on campus. This week, protests over the Israel-Hamas war have popped up at colleges across the country. Hundreds of students have been arrested. The National Desk, Kayla Gaskins reports.
Anti-Israel protests gaining steam cross-country as officials attempt to crack down. A protest encampment popping up Thursday morning at George Washington University in D.C. Palestine is almost free. Demonstrators calling for violence against the Jewish state. Also on Thursday, what's being dubbed the Intifada tent camp emerging on campus at the City College of New York. On Wednesday, more than 100 Emerson student protesters arrested in Boston. In Texas, 57 UT Austin students arrested at another protest. Nearly 100 more arrested for trespassing at the University of Southern California after ignoring a dispersal order. In response, the Council on American Islamic Relations condemning USC's actions, calling the crackdown a forcible suppression of free speech. Meanwhile, critics pointing out how slow many universities have responded to what they call the harassment of Jewish students compared to the swift action taken in the past for perceived harassment of other groups.
Most are very slow, cowardly, and unprincipled in their willingness to stand up to protect their students, to enforce their codes of conduct in a uniform way.
Washington getting tangled in the tensions. Speaker Mike Johnson visiting Columbia this week, making his stance clear.
Neither Israel nor these Jewish students on this campus will ever stand alone.
Others, like Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, backing the protesters.
The power of young people shaping this country.
When lawmakers return to Capitol Hill next week, this issue will still likely be top of mind. There's already a House GOP-led hearing set for May 8th to examine anti-Semitism in K-12 education. In Washington, I'm Kayla Gaskins reporting for the National Desk, America's News Now.
As protests spread coast to coast, new polling shows the situation in Gaza is not top of mind for young Americans, at least when it comes to this year's election. According to a new Harvard Youth poll, just 2% consider the Israel-Hamas war their biggest concern. 11% of those polled say the economy is most concerning. 8% said inflation. 6% said the environment. Developing now, a New York appeals court has overturned Harvey Weinstein's sex crimes convictions and ordered a new trial. The disgraced Hollywood producer was convicted in 2020 of first-degree criminal sexual assault and third-degree rape. The court ruled that 3 women should not have been allowed to testify as prior bad acts witnesses. Weinstein will remain jailed in New York as the process plays out. The Justice Department has reached a $138 million settlement over the FBI's mishandling of the Larry Nassar case. Nassar is currently serving decades in prison for abusing hundreds of women under the guise of treating sports injuries. After this week's settlement, there's now been $1 billion set aside to compensate the victims, including decorated Olympian Simone Biles, Allie Raceman, and Michaela Maroney. The Supreme Court appears to be searching for a middle ground on former President Trump's claims of immunity. Trump's attorneys admitting some of his clients' actions after the 2020 election were private, meaning they're not entitled to immunity. That likely means special counsel Jack Smith's January 6th criminal trial, at least in part, can go forward.
We have a big case today. This judge isn't allowing me to go. We have a big case today in the Supreme Court on presidential immunity. A president has to have immunity. If you don't have immunity, you just have a ceremonial president.
The justices could send the case back to lower courts, which could push the trial past the November election. In the meantime, Trump spent part of this week in a Manhattan courtroom in his so-called hush money trial. Our coverage of Trump's legal troubles continues with the biggest takeaways from the Manhattan courtroom so far. Here's the National Desk, Christine Frizzell.
It was an early morning campaign stop. Former President Donald Trump shaking hands with construction workers in New York City ahead of his day back in court.
They've taken my constitutional right away with a gag order. That's all it is. It's election interference. This whole thing is election interference.
Inside the courtroom, former National Enquirer publisher David Pecker back on the stand with a focus on a $150,000 payment the magazine made to former Playboy model Karen McDougal, who claimed she had an affair with Trump, to buy the rights of the story and then bury it, an expense for which Pecker says he was never reimbursed, which later played a role in him ending the deal he had with Michael Cohen.
His testimony is that he did this to help Trump and help the Trump campaign for president in 2016. The theory of the case is there was a conspiracy to interfere with the election to prevent voters from knowing about certain relationships and to pay those folks to keep it quiet.
Pecker also admitting he falsely denied the details in this Wall Street Journal article from 2016, telling the court, quote, "I wanted to protect my company, I wanted to protect myself, and I wanted also to protect Donald Trump." Still, experts say proving any illegal behavior will be difficult.
The Trump team is going to say, the former president didn't keep those books, and that whatever was done, people may not like what was done with paying people off not to talk. That's legal. And that's probably done in campaigns more than we know in this country.
This as another round of legal troubles come from Arizona, where a grand jury indicted 18 Trump allies in a fake electors scheme to prevent the lawful transfer of the presidency in the 2020 election, naming Trump as an unindicted co-conspirator in the case.
As far as the hush money case, defense attorneys will certainly have plenty of time for cross-examination of the witnesses. Among them, former fixer Michael Cohen, who hinted he will be taking the stand in a matter of weeks. I'm Christine Frizzell for the National Desk.
President Biden is campaigning on what Democrats hope is a galvanizing issue for voters this November, reproductive rights. On Tuesday, the president was in Florida, where a 6-week abortion ban is set to go into effect next week. But Florida voters will have a chance this fall to enshrine abortion rights in the state's constitution. Biden wants to tie bans and restricted abortion access directly to former President Trump.
It was Donald Trump who ripped away the rights of freedom of women in America. It'll be all of us who restore those rights for women in America. And when you do that, we'll teach Donald Trump and the extreme MAGA Republicans a valuable lesson. Don't mess with the women of America.
Trump touts the fact that he nominated 3 Supreme Court justices who were in the majority that overturned Roe v. Wade. He and many other Republicans argue the abortion issue should be left to the states. This week, the Supreme Court took up a case over emergency abortions. The justices are set to decide how far state abortion bans can extend to women in medical emergencies. The White House argues scattered state abortion bans confuse doctors and could delay life-saving care. Republican National Committee Chairman Michael Whatley said in a statement that Biden's abortion views are, quote, radical and wildly out of touch with most Americans. The state of Colorado just passed a new privacy law that has to do with brain waves. I'm with Courtney from the Fact Check team. Break this down. What's in the law?
Sure, Dee Dee. So Colorado is the first state to pass a law like this. I read through and it essentially expands the definition of sensitive data under the Colorado Privacy Act to include neural data or data found in a person's brainwaves, which means it'll have the same protections as fingerprints or facial recognition data, for example. The law is focused on consumer-level brain technologies because that data is unregulated, while sensitive patient data collected from medical devices is already protected by federal health law.
And are there any other states considering anything similar?
There are. California has a similar bill called the Neuro Rights Act making its way through the state legislature, and lawmakers in Minnesota are working on their own version. I also want to note that several countries, including Chile, Brazil, Spain, and Mexico, have already given brain data constitutional protections or are taking steps to.
Courtney, thank you. And there's much more to this. Courtney will be back later in the show to talk more about the neurotech industry. More than 3 million Medicare enrollees could now be eligible for the popular weight loss drug Wegovy. That's according to a new analysis by KFF, formerly known as the Kaiser Family Foundation, that cited the recent FDA approval of the drug for patients with cardiovascular disease. However, the expansion could end up costing Medicare nearly $3 billion a year, possibly contributing to higher Part D premiums for all beneficiaries. Ahead on the national desk, Afghanistan accountability. The new report challenging the Pentagon's credibility years after the withdrawal. Green Beret and Florida Congressman Mike Waltz weighs in. Plus, first-time home buyers struggling to break into the market, the unusual strategy some are employing to push past high interest rates and low inventory. Nearly 3 years after the withdrawal from Afghanistan, new details are still emerging. CNN is reporting they have new video evidence which undermines the Pentagon's account of what happened outside the Kabul airport in August of 2021. Joining Jan Jeffcoat to discuss is Green Beret and Florida Congressman Mike Waltz, who was briefed on the investigation.
Thanks for joining us and for your service to our country as always, Congressman. This
Thank
investigation has been disastrous, just like the withdrawal, quite frankly. It was the worst casualty for U.S. troops in Afghanistan in over a decade. You are a Pentagon policy advisor. What do you make of this new report, and what have you been told?
Well, I was really astounded by the CNN report that just came out, literally showing footage that had never been seen before from a Marine that was there. So my first question is, why wasn't that included in either of the previous two Pentagon investigations? The second of which I was just briefed on last week, and the investigators were definitive that every casualty we took, the 13 killed, the several dozen wounded, and the 170 Afghans were all from the single suicide bomber, which, by the way, was let out of prison at Bagram Air Base that we had controlled just a few weeks prior, and that there was no subsequent firefight. The families of the 13 that were killed believed that there were, and were again told, no, that's not the case. And then the CNN footage comes out clearly showing and hearing gunfire that was going on after the bombing. And then secondarily, look, these poor families deserve some type of closure. They deserve to know exactly what happened. And the fact that it has taken the Pentagon years to investigate and reinvestigate, and they're still apparently missing things, is just kind of mind-blowing, sad, and you're right. It follows in line with the debacle that this entire withdrawal was.
Is there a cover-up?
You know, I don't think so in the case of the investigation. I think it was, frankly, a rushed investigation the first time, and they missed some things. Like, for example, the Marine sniper, Tyler Vargas Andrews, that was so wounded they didn't investigate him the first time, but we didn't find out that he believed he had a shot on the sniper until Congress got involved and did its investigation. So I don't think it was a cover-up as much as just a poor execution, and they've missed a number of things. But I will say that there is, both in the Pentagon, national security circles, the White House, it is kind of understood that Afghanistan is not to be talked about. The Pentagon is not cooperating with congressional investigation and giving us all of the things that we've asked for, giving us access to all of the people that we've asked for. So the administration at the White House level, not so much the military, just clearly wants to move on.
Yeah,
this is bad for Biden politically. They don't want to talk about it anymore. And the thing that has me so upset is that terrorism once again is brewing. It is simmering, and it is going to come back to hit us. It's like going back to pre-9/11, coming from Afghanistan once again.
And that right there, that statement is very troubling, because as a decorated Green Beret who has served multiple combat tours in Afghanistan and quite frankly the Middle East, what should we do now moving forward with what's happening there? And how concerned are you with Hamas and Iran's nuclear capabilities?
Well, we've taken our eye off the ball in Afghanistan. We trusted the Taliban, as though there's this kind of philosophy the Biden White House has, that we can trust the not so bad terrorists to keep an eye on the really bad terrorist, ISIS, which is a flawed strategy. There are freedom fighters and a resistance movement that we should absolutely be maintaining contact with when it comes to keep an eye on terrorism coming out of its heartland, which is Afghanistan and Pakistan. On Iran, this administration's Middle East and Iran policy has completely failed. We've gone from the Abraham Accords and Iran being broke and ISIS being defeated to now ISIS, Hamas, Hezbollah are on the march. Iran is on the march. And the biggest thing that this administration could and should be doing is dry up the cash in Tehran, in Iran, that is fueling all of this. We have to go back to maximum pressure. Iran is selling its oil to China and then sending that money on to all of its terrorist proxies around Israel, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. If we would only dry up the cash, which means stopping Iran's oil sales, and we should be flooding the market with American oil and gas, that drives down the price of oil, that dries up the cash for Iran to use with terrorism. And this is where the Biden administration's climate agenda is squarely running against our national security.
You can view the full interview plus more top stories online all the time at thenationaldesk.com. New information, it looks like mortgage rates may not unthaw this spring. According to Mortgage News Daily, rates touched 7.5% in April. That's the highest they've been since last fall. Last year, experts were optimistic that rates would drop in early 2024. But the new numbers have mortgage applications on the decline and home sales staying stagnant. Some millennials and Gen Zers are partnering with their friends to become homeowners instead of waiting for marriage. It's a growing movement called Houses Before Spouses, and the National Desk Janae Bowens has a look at the trend.
Christina Moderis and Stephanie Douglas didn't wait to find the loves of their lives to buy their first homes.
Houses Before Spouses is our way of saying you don't have to do this in a traditional way.
Their mantra is gaining popularity on social media, where they share how to partner with others to buy homes and build wealth.
Together, we own 24 houses, but only one of those, or maybe two of them, we own on our own. We've partnered on every single other one with our sisters, our friends, our parents.
I could be creative, and I gained a lot of confidence.
Now they are onto something. A recent survey from JW Surety Bonds found nearly 15% of Americans have co-purchased a home with a person other than their romantic partner, and another 48% would consider it. These are numbers Moderis and Douglas expect to keep growing.
You should not do this unless you have an operating agreement.
We say that your first house doesn't have to be your dream house, and it can be a stepping stone.
And this cost sharing is especially needed at a time when mortgage rates are above 7% and the median home sale price is $393,500.
I think this is a way for younger people to get into the market sooner.
The pair have a real estate brokerage called Open House Austin. They've already helped over 600 people buy homes. I'm Janae Bowens reporting.
Just ahead, the city is selling homes for just $1 each. Why some residents are skeptical the program won't help revitalize the properties. Plus, a rise in DUI arrests has Nevada pushing for a change in policy. The efforts to increase penalties and bring down risks for drivers. The National Desk team of reporters is bringing you the headlines from coast to coast. We're taking the pulse of America, and we start in Baltimore, Maryland, where hundreds of city-owned vacant homes are selling for $1 under a fixed pricing program.
Most of the homes being offered, teardowns, some so hollow they have trees growing through them. Plus, the majority of properties aren't homes at all. They're abandoned lots with nothing but weeds. Still interested? If so, residents need at least $90,000 in the bank to qualify and will have to renovate the home within a year and live there for the next 5.
This is absolutely not the same dollar house program as it was before.
Councilwoman Odette Ramos concerned the program lacks some of the services and forethought as it did in the 1970s, which included low-interest renovation loans and revitalized whole communities.
Since the 1990s, there are 420 properties that have been sold by the city that are still vacant. So I do have concerns that if somebody bids on a property or gets the property through this process and then doesn't do anything with it, what ends up happening?
Ultimately, she believes in the program, but much like the vacants up for sale, Ramos says heavy reconstruction is needed in order for it to be successful.
In Fresno, California, the police department is looking for a suspect accused of torching cypress trees at an Armenian cemetery. The arsonist has been plaguing the area since January 20th.
We think they are drawn to the drama of the fire that these cypress trees create. That seems to be the one thing they're targeting.
Setting a tree on fire in a cemetery is a felony, and at least 30 trees have been burned. Crime Stoppers has issued a $2,000 reward for any information on the case. To Las Vegas, where DUI arrests are increasing year over year, despite a decrease in fatalities. According to the Las Vegas Police Department, data from 2020 to 2022 shows a steady increase. A national nonprofit is working with people impacted to find a solution.
It starts with advocacy, so whether that is legislative advocacy to hopefully change some of the implications of criminal actions here in the state of Nevada.
Currently, a DUI in Nevada with no fatality is typically charged as a misdemeanor, putting offenders in jail for a few hours at the most. Coming up, bird flu showing up in milk products within the U.S. What the FDA is saying about the safety of the drink. Plus, protecting your right to swipe. The new security feature for Tinder users that includes family and friends. Taking a look at the top trending stories on our website right now, dairy cows have become infected with bird flu in 8 states. A local dairy expert says there is reason to worry but not panic. He says consumers can feel confident that pasteurized milk and dairy products, as well as properly prepared poultry, are safe to enjoy. A new law in Florida requires inmates, regardless of the nature of their crime, to provide a DNA sample. The move comes as Florida ranks among the top states in the country for unresolved homicide cases. You can now share who you're going on a Tinder date with. The dating app launched a new Share My Date feature. It allows users to share the location, date, time, and a picture of their match. Those stories and more available right now at thenationaldesk.com. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has announced its 2024 induction class. The lineup includes Cher, Mary J. Blige, Jimmy Buffett, Big Mama Thornton, and a dozen others. Each group of diverse inductees has broken down musical barriers and influenced countless other artists after them. The induction ceremony will take place on October 19th in Cleveland, Ohio. Ahead in our next half hour, the healthcare company that says a significant portion of its patients' data was stolen, when those who were impacted can expect to be notified. Plus, ghost gun regulations challenged, the case that could repeal President Biden's requirements for sellers. You're watching The National Desk, America's News Now. You can catch us live weekdays from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time, and anytime online at thenationaldesk.com. We'll be right back. This is the National Desk, America's News Now. The clock is ticking on the sale of TikTok, how content creators are shifting strategies in case the app is banned. Plus,
until recently, as we've said on many occasions, we were unable to provide these ATACMs because of readiness concerns.
New capabilities given in secret, the game-changing delivery from the U.S. to Ukraine. And later, requesting airline refunds could be a thing of the past. The new rule from the White House, making it easier to get money back after a canceled flight. From the nation's capital, this is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Didi Gatton, and TikTok may soon be forced out of the U.S. after a measure to ban the app won congressional approval. But this wouldn't be the first time a country has gotten rid of the popular video sharing service. The National Desk, Jeff Harris, joins us to explain.
We saw this back in 2020 when India decided to ban TikTok after a military clash along the India-China border. 20 Indian and 4 Chinese soldiers were killed, and India's government decided it was time to cut ties, in part because of security concerns.
First, some key differences between India's ban and what could happen here.
In the India case, the ban happened pretty swiftly in the context of conflict with China on India's northern border. In the United States, I think a lot of the motivation for the legislation that recently passed is about Chinese influence and ownership.
As a result of the ban, many digital creators in India turned their attention to other social media platforms to push out content, like Facebook.
When I first got engaged, my mother-in-law gave me a piece of advice about marriage that I did not take, but I absolutely should have taken.
Also, Instagram.
This is how it is with almost all extracurriculars. If you are not signing on at midnight, if you are not ready to hit buy, you're not getting it.
Something Paige Cannell, a mom of 4 living in Massachusetts, started doing this past summer.
I had connected with someone who really encouraged me to get on both Instagram and Facebook to make sure that I was expanding my audience, but also make myself a bit more marketable.
With over 138,000 followers on TikTok,
I do not tend to take a lot of advice from men, even the most successful men.
Canelle is making some money on her posts.
Something clicks in their brain that says, oh, she is going to do my laundry.
But she says if the app were to get banned, having already created these other accounts will help her continue to grow her audience.
I do think that if you are intentional about it, you can diversify where you are and then lean on those apps if this is to go away.
A strategy she says other creators might want to look into.
Just to make sure that you are in the places where you want to be found should the app disappear.
On Wednesday, President Biden did sign the bill forcing TikTok to either find a new owner within a year or face a ban. TikTok plans to challenge this law in court, claiming that it violates First Amendment rights. I'm Jeff Harris reporting from Washington.
A new rule from the White House says airlines can't simply give passengers a voucher after a delayed or canceled flight. Soon, airlines can no longer decide how long a delay must be before a refund is issued. Under the new DOT rules, the delays covered would be more than 3 hours for domestic flights and more than 6 hours for international flights.
In theory, passengers are already supposed to be refunded for a cancellation or a major delay. In practice, it often doesn't work that way. We hear again and again from passengers who describe how hard they have to push just to get the refunds that are owed to them.
Here's how the new rule works. Airlines will now have to issue refunds automatically without passengers requesting them. They must be done within 7 business days and be provided in cash or original payment method. And it must be the full amount minus the portion of transportation already used. Airlines will have 6 months to comply with the new rules. President Biden was in upstate New York this week, highlighting a $6.1 billion deal with semiconductor manufacturer Micron Technology. The government funding will support the construction of 2 manufacturing hubs, one outside of Syracuse, New York, and one in Boise, Idaho, where Micron is based. According to the White House, it marks one of the first steps in Micron's plans to invest up to $125 billion across both states over the next 2 decades.
We're bringing advanced chips manufacturing back to America after 40 years. And it's going to transform our semiconductor industry, a pillar of a modern economy.
The funding comes from the 2022 CHIPS and Science Act. The legislation aims to boost domestic manufacturing of computer chips so the U.S. is less reliant on foreign supply chains. Small business owners across America are at their lowest level of confidence in more than a decade, even worse than during COVID lockdowns. That's according to the National Federation of Independent Business Reports. Joining Jan Jeffcoat to discuss is former White House economic advisor Steve Moore.
Small businesses, as we know, are a pivotal indicator of economic conditions. And you know, they've been hit really hard the past few years, but right now they are at a critical juncture. So tell us more about the Small Business Optimism Index and what it shows.
Well, we all know that small businesses really are the spinal cord of the American economy. They're the ones that employ well over half of the workers in America. And so for big businesses and big corporations, the economy is pretty strong right now, but you're not seeing that with the small business men and women who, you know, employ 50 or 60 workers. You know, we define a small business as less than 100 employees, and they're hurting right now. And one of the reasons, by the way, Jan, is because the inflation that we've seen over the last several years has really hammered small businesses in terms of their costs a lot more than bigger businesses.
And another story that we're following this morning is these tariffs that will also have an impact on small businesses as well. President Joe Biden called for tripling tariffs on Chinese steel and aluminum Wednesday when he spoke to union members in Pennsylvania. But during these economic times of turbulence with inflation, how could raising more money through tariffs impact not just consumer prices, but also threaten free trade?
Well, you know, you've now had a situation where tariffs, you know, can raise prices. I mean, a tariff is a tax, right? And if you put tariffs on, for example, steel, well, that may improve your, you know, the number of jobs that you're creating through steel. But think about this, Jan, any company that uses steel in their production is going to face higher prices. So, you know, that's why, look, strategic tariffs can have a positive effect but in many cases, they really can hurt consumers. So we'll see. But right now, you've got, obviously Donald Trump, who I've worked with, who has been supportive of tariffs in order to get countries to do the things that we want. He uses tariffs as a weapon. But I don't know. I worry about the impact that all of these tariffs that both Biden and Trump are talking about will affect consumers. I think they'll make inflation worse.
Also, when he was in office, we were not post-pandemic. We were not going through inflation and high interest rates like we are right now. So it was a different time also in our country when we had those higher tariffs. We do have some interesting news. I'm always curious about this when I see the U.S. dollar is strengthening. The U.S. dollar index, in fact, closed yesterday at its highest level since early November. So what's powering this rally, and what does this mean?
Well, I'm always in favor of a strong and stable dollar. And so the good news in a stronger dollar is that it means that it's a good way to fight inflation if the dollar is appreciating relative to other currencies. So I think it's a positive sign, and I like to see it. But come on, we still haven't solved inflation. You got anyone who goes to the grocery store or the gas pump knows we're still facing record high gas prices. We're still seeing food at the grocery store as high as ever. So maybe, and I'm hopeful on this, Jan, that the strengthening of the dollar will help bring some of these prices down.
What do you attribute to this? What do you attribute to the dollar getting stronger?
I've always said that the United States dollar is the least rotten apple in the cart. So, when we're measuring the dollar relative to other currencies, what it really means is, we've screwed up our economy, but at least we haven't screwed up our economy as much as, the Europeans have and China has and other countries we compete with. But, look at gold price. The gold price hit $2,400 last. There are other alternatives behind other government currencies. Look at cryptos and gold, which are alternatives to government fiat currencies. So keep an eye on those as well.
Former White House economic advisor Steve Moore, always great to see you.
The White House is now confirming it quietly sent missile systems to Ukraine. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says in February, President Biden directed his team to provide Ukraine with a significant number of missiles, giving Ukraine nearly double the striking distance. He says the shipment started moving in March as part of a $300 million aid package.
Until recently, as we've said on many occasions, we were unable to provide these ATACMS because of readiness concerns. But behind the scenes, the administration across the board has worked relentlessly to address those concerns.
Sullivan notes the decision to send the missiles was made following Russia's use of ballistic missiles from North Korea against Ukraine. Looking ahead, the Supreme Court will hear a challenge to the Biden administration's regulations on ghost guns next term. The kits, which can be sold online, allow people to assemble guns at home. The regulation, approved in 2022, requires companies that sell the kits to add serial numbers to the incomplete gun components and conduct background checks on buyers. Those in favor of striking down the regulation say that the administration overstepped its authority. Big tech giants like Meta and Apple are working to develop technology that can detect brain activity for commercial use. I'm back with Courtney from the Fact Check team, and let's talk about neurotechnology, the industry in general. We've been hearing about it more and more. How quickly is it growing?
Pretty quickly, Dee Dee. In fact, according to Harvard Business Review, the global market for it is growing at an annual rate of 12%. And it's expected to pass $21 billion by 2026. And just for context, the market was over $13 billion in 2023.
Neurotechnology devices, they have traditionally been used in the medical field, but they're increasingly marketed towards consumers.
Yeah, and according to a report from the Neuro Rights Foundation, there are already at least 30 neurotech products available for purchase by members of the public. You'll see a list of them there on your screens. The devices either fall into the wellness, recreation, or entertainment, or research categories, or a combination.
All right, long list there. Courtney, thank you. And for more on this Fact Check team topic, including links to their sources, scan the QR code on your screen or visit thenationaldesk.com. New details. United Health says hackers likely stole files containing the personal information of a substantial proportion of Americans earlier this year. The cyber attack happened in February on the company's Change Healthcare business, which is used to submit and process insurance claims. United Health says there is no evidence to suggest doctor charts or full medical histories were stolen. The company warns it could be several months before it can identify and notify those impacted. Still to come, our team of correspondents breaks down this week in Washington, from lawmakers speaking out about protests on college campuses to 2 legal cases impacting former President Trump.
And welcome back. Our Washington Bureau covers the nation's capital every day, reporting on the important issues facing the country and how they impact you. Our team of correspondents is here to share their insights on the stories they've been covering. Pro-Palestinian and anti-Israel protests spreading to college campuses across the country, with Jewish students and staff saying some protesters' actions and statements are putting them in danger. National correspondent Kayla Gaskins, what's been the fallout from these demonstrations?
Well, Steve, we saw these types of protests almost right off the bat after October 7th and after this war between Israel and Hamas broke out. And then things got kind of quiet. But recently, we've really seen an uptick. And we've also seen a change in approach by some of these protesters. There's these tent encampments that have been popping up on these campuses as a way for these protesters to try to make a stronger statement. It makes it a little bit harder for them to remove, and they last a little longer. We saw one of those pop up on Thursday at a GW campus here in Washington, D.C., and another one popped up in New York City at a state-funded city college there. But those are just a few of the examples, and this comes as tensions are ratcheting up between these protesters and university officials that are increasingly now calling in law enforcement. There were hundreds of students arrested at schools like USC in California, UT Austin, and Emerson College in Boston during these protests. CARE, that's the Council on American and Islamic Relations, calling this a violation of free speech. But this crackdown is what Jewish students and advocates for Israel want to see happen. They think these schools have been really slow to respond here in what is being perceived as harassment of Jewish students, when these schools were very quick to act in the past for harassment of other groups of people. And so we'll probably see this spill over into Washington when lawmakers get back from their current recess.
Right. And meanwhile, former President Trump dealing with the justice system on a couple of fronts this week. The Supreme Court hearing arguments about whether a president can receive immunity from criminal prosecution. National correspondent Christine Frizzell, his criminal trial in New York got underway this past week. What's the latest with that?
Yeah, this has been really interesting to watch. Most of the week last week was spent hearing from prosecution's first witness. This is former National Enquirer publisher David Pecker, who gave very detailed descriptions about his role working directly with a former Trump attorney and fixer Michael Cohen, and also with Trump himself. And this has included an active role by the Enquirer to run stories, negative stories about Trump's rivals during the 2016 election, and also to catch and kill negative stories about Trump. This, of course, cost money. So paying people like former Playboy model Karen McDougal, former adult film star Stormy Daniels, more than $100,000 each. Pecker making clear this was not to prevent Trump or his family members from being embarrassed. This was to help him win the election. Legal experts say, you know, this does expose the ugly side of politics, but it will be a high bar for prosecutors to make the case that this was illegal. They're trying to say here, the prosecutors, that this was a conspiracy, this was a scheme, and it violated election law. Trump's defense is going to argue a few things here. First, paying money to influence elections is simply part of American democracy. They're also going to argue that, if indeed this case was about election interference, that it would have been brought in federal court. And federal court, they didn't bring this forward. This is state court. So it's going to be interesting. And I have a feeling we have many, many more weeks in this case.
A national correspondent, Atra Elnashar, you've been following the Supreme Court arguments. President Trump's lawyers arguing in front of the court that he should have immunity from criminal prosecution. Does he have a case?
According to the lower courts, no, he does not, but this is where the Supreme Court obviously comes in. Now, I should note this is focused around the federal election case that's litigated by special counsel Jack Smith, accusing him of 4 charges, basically saying he tried to overturn the 2020 election. Like you said, Trump's argument is that he should have total immunity for anything he did as president unless he was impeached and convicted, which of course he had 2 impeachments. Neither of them ended in a conviction. The special counsel's team says that that's not the case, that no one is above the law, many pointing to the instance of Gerald Ford giving Richard Nixon a pardon. They say that it's always been the assumption for presidents that they are liable, especially for actions that do not fall under the office, the duties of the president. So the Supreme Court is going to have to decide whether Trump's claims have any merit. They're not expected to. They are expected to reject this claim that he's got total immunity. It's just a matter of whether they go further and say when a president or former president does and does not have immunity. And their decision is almost just as important as when they decide it. If they wait until the end of June, until the end of their term, to issue that decision, that is going to delay Jack Smith's case even further, making it less likely that he'll be able to present his case before a jury before Americans vote in November.
Audra, Christine, Kayla, excellent reporting as always. Thank you all for your hard work. Back to you.
Ahead on the National Desk, America's News Now. Breaking ground, the new high-speed train connecting 2 major West Coast cities. How much time it will cut off commutes. Plus, a deadly school bus crash spurring change in a Texas district. The funds now going towards seatbelts on all buses. This is the National Desk, America's News Now. We have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering issues that matter to you. From Washington state businesses struggling with crime to Texas parents pushing for seatbelts on school buses after a deadly crash. We're taking the pulse of America, but we begin in Las Vegas and the starting point for a new rail system linking the city to Southern California.
Groundbreaking for a high-speed rail system between Las Vegas and Southern California. Monday morning marked the beginning of construction for Brightline West.
Very exciting project, and it starts right here in Las Vegas.
Californians who drove to Las Vegas for the weekend tell me they're looking forward to using the rail line, connecting people between Las Vegas and Rancho Cucamonga with stations in Apple Valley and Hesperia.
I think that would really alleviate a lot of stress and just the traffic. It's just bad sometimes.
So it'd be nice to be able to just sit back and enjoy that.
Brightline West comes at a pretty penny, $12 billion to be exact. But some wonder if they're just getting their hopes up considering this project has been in the works for so long.
Can problems happen? Absolutely. And they aren't necessarily related to the train itself.
It hurts to see someone so young, gone. You know, the parents didn't see their son grow up.
As T-ball practice was happening across the field, the Hayes CISD Board of Trustees approved the $4.7 million purchase of 30 new school buses and allocated $400,000 towards retrofitting a set of 9 older buses with seatbelts.
You have people that are still reeling, they're still hurting from this, and they want to see action taking place.
Those votes followed a special meeting last week where the district unanimously approved a new plan to ensure every bus in the district is equipped with seatbelts. The bus involved in the crash was an older model that wasn't required by state law to have seatbelts.
We hope that by being able to take this fast action that we're demonstrating, it illustrates that the entire community is with them.
The district says by this Wednesday, all regular route buses will have seatbelts.
It's kind of sad that I heard a lot of
broken in around this neighborhood.
Images we've seen on repeat.
It's obviously that I got targeted.
Gloria Oyang's hit not once by thieves, but twice. Her glass door shattered. A month later, thieves broke windows.
It's a lot of things to handle.
15 grand in stolen merchandise and repairs. Money mom and pop businesses can't afford. Which is why I asked if she applied for the city's storefront repair fund. Turns out she never heard of it.
They don't really promote it.
I visited 4 other businesses on her block. None of them knew that small businesses who qualify can apply for a $2,000 grant for repairs for break-in damages like doors and windows.
I think we can always do better as a city in demonstrating our support for small businesses and making sure they know that we're here for them and we want them to succeed.
Still ahead, the stories making headlines next week, from the verdict in a high-profile money laundering case to the Fed's next interest rate decision. Looking ahead to stories making headlines this week, the former CEO of the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange, Binance, will learn his fate on Tuesday. Champaign Zhao pleaded guilty late last year to a felony related to his failure to prevent money laundering on his platform. All eyes will be on the Federal Reserve on Wednesday. That's when the Federal Open Market Committee will make its decision on interest rates. And experts warned they were coming. Trillions of cicadas will be emerging in the eastern part of the U.S. this month. However, some are already causing trouble. Over in South Carolina, the Newberry County Sheriff's Office took to Facebook after it received numerous calls about a noise that sounded like a siren. Investigators confirmed residents were actually just hearing cicadas. This year marks the first time since 1803 that 2 broods of cicadas are emerging simultaneously. New details: NASA and Nokia are teaming up to bring cell service to the moon. A SpaceX rocket is set to launch this year, carrying a 4G network system to the moon. The system will connect to land rovers that will search and photograph lunar ice before sending it back to Earth through the established cellular network. This kind of cellular connectivity would be a world first, as well as a key for NASA's Artemis program, which aims to return astronauts to the moon within the decade. That'll be all for us on the weekend edition of the National Desk, America's News Now. Don't forget, you can catch us live from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time. Check your local listings. You can also watch us online and catch up with the latest headlines on thenationaldesk.com. Thanks for watching the weekend edition of the National Desk. I'm Dee Dee Gatton, and from all of us here, have a great week.